Boa noite a todos e todos. É um enorme prazer abrir esse ciclo de palestras da Fundação Getúlio Vargas. Meu nome é Eric Klug, eu sou presidente da Japan House São Paulo. A Japan House é uma iniciativa do governo japonês, estabelecida em 2017, que recebe milhões de pessoas para suas exposições. Temos duas no momento, a exposição Daisy Balloon e a exposição da artista japonesa Yuko Mori, e uma infinidade de eventos online e híbridos, incluindo, por exemplo, as nossas exposições virtuais, todas acessíveis no nosso site, eventos como o nosso clube de leitura e as nossas online trip. Então fiquem, por favor, convidados a visitar presencialmente, digitalmente a Japan House e usá-la como uma ponte entre o Brasil e o Japão. Nós investimos muito nos nossos recursos de acessibilidade, tanto física quanto digital, para tornar essa experiência o mais ampla possível e mais prazerosa. Muito obrigado.
Good evening, everyone. We are starting another lecture organized by the Japan House São Paulo in collaboration with the School of International Relations at Fundação Getúlio Vargas, where researchers from Japan and from Brazil discuss some of the most relevant issues on contemporary international politics. It is an honor to host Professor Dr. Narushige Michishita from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo, who will conduct the main lecture on the Japanese responses to the rise of China, as well as Professor Dr. Alexandre Uehara from ESPM and the University of São Paulo, who will be tonight's commentator. These roles will be swapped in the next event on November 25th. We would like to disclaim that all statements expressed during this event represent only personal opinions and not necessarily the institutional position of Fundação Getúlio Vargas. Also, all present here have agreed to participate and have consented to be recorded on this broadcast, which will be later posted on FGV's official channels. Our audience can and is encouraged to send us questions during the entire duration of the event through the Slido platform, which can be accessed in the event description on YouTube. During the last part of the webinar, some of your questions will be part of the debate. And without further ado, I introduce the lecturer of the night, Dr. Narushigi Mishishita, Vice President and Professor at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, GRIPS, in Tokyo, and specialist in Japanese security and foreign policy, as well as security issues on the Korean Peninsula. He acquired his PhD with distinction from the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. His professional background includes the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., and multiple positions in the government of Japan, such as the National Security Secretariat Advisory Board, Japan's National Institute for Defense Studies at the Ministry of Defense, and the Cabinet Secretariat for Security and Crisis Management. Professor Mishishita, good morning to you in Japan, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Luana, for the kind introduction. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Narushige Michishita. I will talk about the rise of China and Japan's response today. But before I get into the subject matter, let me briefly introduce my school and myself to you. All right, so this is a school where I teach. I teach international security affairs at this National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, long name. So we try to abbreviate it and say that, call it GRIPS, G-R-I-P-S, which is a good name for a school because it means brain in German, right? But then when I said this, one of my French-speaking friends raised his hand and said, oh, GRIPS in French means influenza. So we stick to German. We have about 300 students. This is a graduate school only school, so we have all of our students are MA, master's degree, or PhD students. We have about 300 students, of whom 2/3 are from overseas, right? So that's a highly international environment. And actually, if you take a look at the list of alumni that we have, there are 13 alums that we have from Brazil. So we would like to have more. So if you are interested, we teach international security and international relations, international development, public policy, economics, and disaster management. So if you are interested in studying about those subjects in Tokyo, please think about applying for our school. So this is how it looks like. If you are in at GRIPS, this is the environment that you will be in. About myself, so as Luana kindly introduced, so I've written a book on the history of North Korea's brinkmanship diplomacy. I published this book, North Korea's military diplomatic campaigns, 1966 to 2008, in 2009. So it's been more than 10 years since then, right? But North Korea's, the range of North Korea's missiles have improved. The explosion yield of North Korean nuclear weapons have strengthened. But the thing is, what North Korea is doing is the same, basically trying to use their military capabilities to gain diplomatic and other gains, right? So, well, it's interesting. And anyway, if you are interested in the history of North Korea's brinkmanship diplomacy, please take a look. And currently, I'm writing a book on the history of Cold War in the Pacific. So I'm taking a look at what the Soviet Union was doing back then and what the United States and Japan were doing in counter to that. It's interesting to learn about what happened during the 1980s because there are actually a lot of similarities between what we are doing back then and what we are doing right now. There are a lot of similarities between what the Soviet Union was doing back then and what China is doing today and what we are doing with the US and Japan and other countries are doing in this region. And this actually monograph that I did with Peter Schwartz and David Winkler, who are specialists about of this subject. This monograph is on the website. So if you are interested, please Google it and download the report. All right, so let's get into today's topic. So the rise of China and Japan's response. So I'll be talking about two things. So in the first half, I will talk about how gigantic the power shift that is taking place in this region and what China has been doing. And in the second part, I will talk about how Japan is responding to that big change. So let me first talk about, show you how gigantic the change or shifting balance of power in this region. So this is a table. If you take a look at this table, I took it from a report that the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, publishes every year. So these are the countries, 40 countries, or I cut it off at 22. But the countries with the highest military expenditure in 2020. If you take a look at this, in the first place is the United States with its defense spending of $778 billion, followed by China with its defense spending of $252 billion. Japan is in the 9th place, not too bad, with its defense spending of $49.1 billion. But if you take a look at more interestingly, if you take a look at these figures under the title Change Percent 2011 to 20. So these figures represent the growth rate of defense expenditure of these countries in the past 10 years. So in the past 10 years, between 2011 and 2020, the US defense expenditure has actually declined by 10%. while the Chinese defense expenditure has increased by 76%, and Japanese one has increased by modest 2.4%. So if you take a look, do the math, you can easily understand the shift or trend. So you can see that how even if the US and Japan work closely together, it might be difficult for us to keep competing with China. Well, certainly the US still spends as like 3 times as much as China. So it's a good news. But you have to understand the fact that while the US forces are globally deployed and the US have been fighting wars in the Middle East, China, China spends much less than the US, but the Chinese forces are only regionally or locally deployed, right? So you have to take into those factors into account when you try to make sense of these figures. And based on this increasing the defense expenditure, Chinese military activities in the region are growing or becoming more active. So I took this map from Japan Defense White Paper, which is again on the website, and if you're interested, it's a lot of information that it carries. So if you're interested in issue, you can download it from the website. So if you take a look at this map, these red arrows represent Chinese naval activities, and these yellow arrows represent Chinese air activities. So, there are a lot of, arrows around, but if you take a look at the, thick arrows sticking from between East China Sea and the Western Pacific, there are 2, thick arrows, yellow and red ones, between Okinawa here, between Okinawa and the Miyakojima Islands, right? What are the Chinese military, Air Force and the Navy doing here? Actually, they are trying to create or exercise the capability and enhance their capabilities to prevent US strike forces from coming close to Taiwan or coming close to Senkaku Islands or coming close to China's east coast. So when we talk about this, we always talk about A2AD, which stands for Anti-Access Area Denial, A2AD. So which means that China is trying to create a situation where US forces or Japanese forces as well will not be able to come close to China. So as a result of these increasing Chinese activities, Japanese forces are forced to respond more actively. So these graphs, so if you take a look at these bars, these figures represent the number of scramble flights that Japan's Air Self-Defense Force have been performing, and in the past year. So if you can take a look at this, so these orange parts are the number of flights that Japanese Air Force conducted vis-a-vis Chinese military aircraft, and the blue parts represents a number of scrambles that the Japanese Air Force flew vis-a-vis Russian aircraft. So they are becoming more busy. And if you compare the figure, at the peak year of 2016, we flew 1,168 scramble flights. And that was actually larger in number than the scramble flights during the Cold War. So you can see how tense the situation is becoming in the region. So this is another graph. So these red bars in this graph represent the number of Chinese Coast Guard ships which entered Japanese territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands. Well, the Japanese government's position is that there is no territorial dispute, but the Chinese government have been claiming its sovereignty over those Senkaku Islands, 5 relatively small islands in the East China Sea. So in order to, what is China trying to do here is to, by kind of having their its Coast Guard ships enter and operate inside the Japanese territories regularly, they are trying to create a situation where they can say maybe after 10, 20 years, our ships have been operating here in this area because these waters belong to China. So this we have control and we administer this area. Therefore, China has a sovereignty over these 5 islands. So we call it what's China trying to do. We use the term salami slicing tactics, right? So it's like, it's not about taking China trying to take those islands by force tomorrow. It's about they take 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, forward every day over a long time to create a new reality. So we try to resist it. So these are the things that China has been doing, and we are trying to find a way to respond to those initiatives effectively. So when we talk about the Senkaku Islands, ultimately, we are not too concerned about the legitimacy of our claim, Japan's claim of sovereignty over those islands. And in fact, we have already found out a Chinese documents. Both this one on the right is left is a declassified Chinese diplomatic document talking about the Senkaku Islands as part of Japanese territory. And on the right is an excerpt from an article in the Chinese daily, People's Daily, talking about the Senkaku Island as a part of Japanese territory. So it's very obvious that China changed its position out of convenience. Okay, so what is Japan doing in order to counter these Chinese activities? Before I talk about what we are doing, let me talk about 2 big policy objectives that we have in responding to China. One is to maintain the balance of power in the region. And hopefully by doing so, encourage China to take a more cooperative path in the end. China has been using force to coerce its neighbors into diplomatic submission. China has been using salami slicing tactics in order to create new reality. But I mean, I guess current leadership, headed by Mr. Xi Jinping, has been taking very coercive, assertive policies. But I mean, there are people, I believe, inside the Chinese leadership or in the Chinese society who think it's a bad idea for China to become a bully, right? There must be people who think that China should try to become a respected great power rather than bullish, irresponsible power, right? So by maintaining the balance of power. Why can we do it by maintaining the balance of power? If we maintain a balance of power in this region and maintain credible deterrence against Chinese aggressive activities, then that would create a favorable environment in which more moderate political forces inside China to be able to speak up, right? You know, if you take a look at what's going on in the world, you know, China is becoming, by taking these coercive actions, China is isolating. We are isolating ourselves, and Xi's policy is not producing good results. So we have to play the game more cooperatively, right? But if we fail to maintain the power balance of power in this region, then if a coercive approach taken by the current leadership succeeds and produce good results for China, for them, that would even, you know, more encourage them to become even more coercive. So that would be dangerous. The second major objective that Japan has in crafting our policy is to prevent crises and manage them if they occur. China is one of the most important countries to Japan, of course, right? It's a neighbor, it's a big neighbor, important neighbor. China is the largest trading partner to Japan, and it's critical for us not to engage in any major military confrontations. So those are the two important objectives. So in order to achieve these objectives, Japan has been doing, there are three things that Japan has been doing to cope with the rise of China. The first one is it's about enhancing Japan's own defense capabilities. The Japanese Diet, which is a parliament, enacted a set of security legislation in 2015 to make it possible for the Japan's armed forces, called the Self-Defense Force, to engage in combat as well as non-combat operations in different contingencies in the region. Japan has been deploying more forces on the islands between Okinawa and Taiwan, as you can see on this map. Again, this is from Japan's Defense White Paper. This is the area, as I show in the previous map, where Chinese naval and air activities have been becoming more active. And in order to prevent crises, two countries, Japan and China, actually established a maritime and aerial communication mechanism in 2018 and introduced standardized communication protocols. So Chinese understand, we certainly understand the importance of preventing crisis, but the Chinese leaders also understands that. So we agreed to create this kind of framework. And I, just after this was created, I watched a TV report in which introduced, kind of showed how Japanese Navy sailors and the Chinese sailors were communicating with each other using this new protocol. And they are like, it was funny, a little bit funny, because the Japanese sailor was speaking Janglish, right? Japanized English in a Japanese, with a very strong Japanese accent. And the Chinese sailor was speaking in Chinglish, right? Very, in English, he was speaking English with a strong Chinese accent. So I was like, are they really communicating? But they are professionals. It's when you talk about engage in professional communications, they seems to be understanding each other. So I was like, wow, they are professionals, and they can understand each other. So that was good. And the second pillar in Japan's security strategy is it's about strengthening the U.S.-Japan alliance. The U.S. and Japan revised the U.S.-Japan defense guidelines. This is not. So the defense guidelines in 2015, which determined how the two countries' armed forces share roles, missions, and capabilities in different contingencies. So basically, this is about how the two countries' armed forces work together, right, effectively. And based on that, those new defense guidelines, two US and Japanese forces have been conducting combined exercises and developing combined operation plans and all that. So we are doing a good job. And by strengthening the alliance, the US and Japan seek to maintain the balanced power in the East China Sea, South China Sea, and across the Taiwan Strait. Now the defense of Taiwan has become one of the most important agendas in Japan's security policy. Actually, in April, when then Prime Minister Suga visited the US and met with President Biden, the two leaders said that peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait was important. And finally, the third and the last pillar in Japan's security strategy is about strengthening security partnerships with the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. When we say that, the potential security partners are already there, some of them are security partners, include the countries such as Australia, India, ASEAN countries, and hopefully South Korea. Why do we regard these countries as important security partners? There is a reason. If you take a look at again this table of countries with largest military expenditures, where are they? India, it's a part of a Quad countries, Quad countries. This is a kind of newly emerging regional framework involving the United States, Japan, Australia, and India. So India is now in the third. India has become the third largest spender on defense in the world, with its defense spending of $72.9 billion, and its defense expenditure has increased by 34% in the past decade. So India is doing a great job. Australia is in the 12th place. It's impressive given its population of about 24 million. With its defense spending of $27.5 billion and its defense expenditure increasing by 33% in the past decade. Also, South Korea, we regard South Korea as a potential important strategic partner. You know, South Korea is in 10th place, just one rank down from Japan, with its defense spending of 45.7%, $45.7 billion, with its defense expenditure increasing by 41% in the past 10 years. That's impressive, right? And so it's a matter of time when South Korea will overtake Japan in terms of defense expenditure. So what we are saying is, well, as I said, the US and Japan, even if they get together, work closely together, it might be difficult for them to keep competing with China forever. But if we bring these countries, India, Australia, South Korea, into our coalition, we might not be able to outcompete with China, but we will be probably able to maintain the balance of power very effectively. And then we have to think about what to do with how to work with Southeast Asian countries. When we talk about Southeast Asian countries and other middle to small powers in the Indo-Pacific region, we will not be able to borrow strategic weight from them, right? They are individually relatively small, and ASEAN, unfortunately, have been quite divided. Some of the countries are more closer to China than to the US and Japanese side, Japan, and some others are working more closely with us. So what we are trying to do vis-a-vis or with those countries is to strengthen the security defense capabilities of those countries. So when we talk about this, we use the term capacity building. So we are trying to, by providing, for example, if you take a look at this slide, the Japanese government decided to provide 10 patrol boats to the Philippine Coast Guard, right? And 7, 8 similar patrol boats to Vietnam. And Japan has recently made the decision to sell radar systems to the Philippines. So by doing so, we are trying to create a situation where they are empowered enough. These countries are empowered enough to resist Chinese coercion. So that's what we are doing. And actually, as part of these efforts, GRIPS plays a role. So we decided to establish a new program called the Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program. We call it MSP. And in that program, we bring together up to 10 junior Coast Guard officers from the countries in this region, including, so if you take a look at this, this guy here is Japanese, this guy is from Malaysia, this guy is from Sri Lanka, his name is Daniel, he's from Malaysia, he's from the Philippines, this lady is from Japan, and this guy is from Malaysia. So every year we tend to invite 2 Japanese Coast Guard officers and up to 8 Coast Guard officers from other countries. And we provide education, they study at GRIPS in Tokyo for 6 months. So, and after that, they move to Kure in Hiroshima in the western part of Japan at the Japan Coast Guard Academy for 4 months. And after about 1 year of schooling, they acquire master's degrees. And good news is that there are 2 patrol boats that Japan provided to Sri Lanka. You can see Sri Lankan national flag flying. And great news to us is, surprise, surprise, do you remember who this is? Daniel, our Alan from this MSP program, became a captain of one of the ships that Japan provided to Sri Lanka. So when we heard the news, that we said, wow, that's great, that's perfect. So that's what we are, GRIPS is doing to promote security and stability in this region. And actually this program, MSP program, is sponsored by JICA, Japan International Cooperation Agency, which is an aid organization of the Japanese government. So this is a nationwide effort that we are making to promote peace and stability in this region. And finally, the Japanese self-defense force, maritime self-defense force, have been sending its ships to visit different ports in the Indo-Pacific region for example, Klang in Malaysia, Nuara in Brunei, Colombo, Hambantota, and Trincomalee in Sri Lanka. Why are we doing this? Because we send ships to those ports because they are the ports and where the Chinese influence has been growing. So by sending our very big ships like this one, flat deck, we call it destroyer, but they are more like carriers, to those ports to send a message to the target countries saying that Japan is committed to the peace and security in this region. So you can be reassured. So in order to reassure them of their security, we send ships. And also we send a message to the Chinese that they can certainly develop those ports that as long as they are beneficial, mutually beneficial to China and the host country, but China will not be able to monopolize those ports. And we send a message to the international community that these ports are free and open. And more recently, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force conducted the anti-submarine warfare exercise involving these ships, flat deck carriers, and submarines, and that was interesting because China operates its ballistic missile submarines in the South China Sea. So it was a message to the Chinese military planners that we know this is an important critical strategic region. And also the Japanese ships conducted this exercise inside the 9-dash line, which is claimed by China. It's sort of excessive maritime claim made by China. So by conducting a military exercise in that area, we were trying to send a message again that we do not accept such an excessive claim made by China. So that's what we've been doing, and we don't know what will happen, whether we will succeed or not, but we will try our best and see what happens. Fingers crossed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your experience perspective with us, Professor Mishishita. Once again, we encouraged our audience to send their questions through the Slido platform. And I now introduce our commentator of the night, Dr. Alexandre Uehara, one of the main specialists in Japanese international relations in Brazil. He is an academic coordinator of the Brazilian Center for International Business and Corporate Diplomacy and of the Center for Asian Studies and Business. He is a professor at the Faculty of International Relations at ESPM. Professor Uehara collaborates with the postgraduate program of Japanese language, literature, and culture at the University of São Paulo, where he also coordinates the group of studies on Asia. He received his PhD from the University of São Paulo and has been visiting professor in Japanese institutions such as Keio University and Sophia University, as well as collaborating with Japan's External Trade Organization. Dr. Uehara, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Luana, for your kind presentation. I'm so glad to be here tonight in this webinar promoted by Japan House and some FGV, Fundação Getúlio Vargas from São Paulo. Thank you very much for your invitation. And thank you, Professor Mishishita, for your presentation, your share important topics with us tonight. For example, about the worries that the countries have among the China foreign policies, because China has converted its economic power into military power. That's an important concern that the countries in the region has at this moment. Other important point is the Taiwan issue, because many countries now has concern about what China will do at this moment. Other point that I perceive as important is the balance of power, and you mentioned the Quad schedule. That's very important also in the region. Then we can see that there are many important points that you mentioned tonight, and it's difficult to choose one to comment or but I will try to my best. One point that is very interesting to me as a Japanese Brazilian is that is related to the map that you present in your presentation, because it's very different from our Brazilian perspectives. You showed a map with Japan and China and the islands that Japan has in the sea. What is different? Because here in Brazil, normally we studied and taught using the map with Europe in the center, and this map is used all the time. Yeah, even for children and at the university. But you show the map a different perspective. Japan in the top of the map, and China in the bottom, located in the bottom. And if you pay attention, we pay attention in that map that you showed, we can perceive that China almost has to ask permission from Japan to access the ocean. That's an important point of view, especially if we think that Beijing is the north of China. The capital of China is in the north, and we can see the Ryukyu Islands also, including Senkaku Island, as a kind of barrier to China. That's a geopolitical issue that I think is very important. That's a very interesting point of view. When we study here in Brazil, we can't see that geopolitical issue, because the map is always China, Japan. It's different point of view. That's one thing that I want to ask you. In Japan, how many maps you use to teach geography, geopolitics at school, at university? If you use many perspectives to show this different point of views, because I think it's very important. And here in Brazil, I try to teach this kind of difference for my students also. But I want to hear your opinion in Japan. How is this this kind of maps in Japan from different perspective? If you, in that case, you rotate the globe, yeah, the world is like a ball, and you can see the different perspective. That's a good point of view.
Yeah.
Okay, please.
May I respond? Yeah. Actually, yes. Actually, it's sort of new to us too. So we've just recently started to use that kind of a rotated map in order to take a look at the same map or geography from a different perspective. So the one that I showed you is, as you pointed out, it's a Chinese view. of the world, right? So the Beijing, if you sitting in Beijing, taking a look at how to go ahead and go out to the Western Pacific, that's what you think about. And so that's new, and it's, I think, is a good idea because we are not only taking a look at the situation from our perspective only. We understand any strategic issues is always interactive, right? When we think about deterrence, I mean, we can't deter our potential rivals by simply increasing our military capabilities. We have to convey our intentions accurately, right, and effectively to the perceivers, right, or the targets. So if the Chinese leaders understand what we do and decided to engage in more in arms race more aggressively, that would backfire on us. So that's why we are careful when we talk about strengthening our capabilities and coalition partnerships. We keep conveying our intentions to Chinese counterparts, saying what we would like to see is the rise of responsible, respected China. We are not trying to prevent China from growing and becoming a big power, great power. Nobody would be able to prevent that, as a matter of fact. So I think it's important to, by using different maps and, different kind of taking into account different perspective and interactive, unexpected results resulting from, the interactions. We have to craft policy in an effective manner.
Okay, congratulations. I like it. Just one more question that I have is analyzing China foreign policy in the 21st century, especially from 2001. Do you think that there's a change in the China foreign policy, or is something that China had planned since many years ago, and now they just putting in practice what they are thinking about China foreign policy or the China position in the world? Or is Xi Jinping foreign policy that he changed the China foreign policy at this moment? What do you think?
I think it's more about Mr. Xi Jinping than anything else, because in fact, Chinese policy have changed over time. In the 2000, in the latter half of the 2000, in 2007, 2008, China and Japan actually came to a very important agreement in which China tacitly accepted the median line between China and Japan in the East China Sea that the Japanese government was claiming. And we decided, came to this agreement in which the two governments agreed to jointly develop the resources in East China Sea. So that was a great moment when we were actually talking about creating a strategic partnership between China and Japan. And people like President Hu Jintao and Premier Wen Jiabao, they are strategically minded people. They were trying to really transform China-Japan relationship into one of cooperation and partnership. Unfortunately, some people who were more interested in internal political struggle, power struggle, than peaceful, stable international relations, used this deal to attack Mr. Hu and Mr. Wen saying, well, you are conceding too much to the Japanese claim. And that was really bad. And after Xi Jinping, Mr. Xi came to power, he decided to, I don't know, maybe as a part of his effort to consolidate his power and undermine his political enemies, started to use nationalism, nationalistic sentiment, and coercive diplomacy, which is isolating China, but he doesn't care about that. What he cares about is how to best consolidate his domestic political power position. And so that's really unfortunate. Why, I always meet, when I meet Chinese friends, I tell them, why is he doing this? Why is China doing this? I mean, you know that China will become a great power anyways. Don't make the mistakes that Germany and Japan made, right? Germany made that kind of mistake twice in the past, in the First World War and the Second World War. If you take a look at what happened after the end of World War II, without fighting, Germany could become a big, important, great power easily in Europe, right? China can do the same. I mean, the Chinese leaders really have to learn lessons read history and learn lessons from Germany and Japan. And I hope that President Xi will change his mind and start working in a more cooperative path. And in that sense, President Xi is going to, meet with President Biden online. So hopefully, that kind of, he will use that kind of opportunities to change course.
Okay. One more question, if I can ask you. Concerning the security in the region, you mentioned the relation between Japan and Philippines, for example, the donation of boats. Specifically about that region, we can say that China is very ambitious in the South China Sea, and it continues actively constructing military artificial islands in the region. And you mentioned the Xi Jinping ambitious also, yeah. How you are thinking about the region, what can happen in the future? Because China spread their power influence in the region, the other countries try to avoid that. But do you see that there is a limit to China ambition in that region, or how far countries can avoid or will allow these initiatives of China?
Yeah, China is so powerful, and we might not be able to prevent China from going into this more coercive, aggressive path. But now the good news is not only the US, Japan, Australia, India, Quad partners, and ASEAN countries getting together, but also countries from Europe, right? Countries in Europe, they are actually getting more interested and getting more committed to maintaining peace and security in this region. Recently, the United Kingdom sent its aircraft carrier to the Pacific, and can engage in exercises, combined exercises with the US and Japanese and other forces. French sent its ships to the Pacific. Germany sent its ships to the Pacific. So countries are really getting together and speaking in one voice to tell the Chinese friends that we are not trying to undermine you. we are trying to help you become a more responsible, respected, great power. And hopefully, bad news is that Mr. Xi is kind of strengthening his political control over the media in China. So Chinese media, if you keep watching the Chinese news every day, you might end up just accepting whatever Mr. Xi says. But Chinese people are not stupid. They are smart people around, and they have backdoor internet access to the world, information available out there. So I hope they will keep kind of learning from the news, more objective news, by maintaining that access to the outside world. And in time, they will become more, motivated and interested in speaking up. And hopefully that will influence how Chinese leadership make decisions, and China hopefully will start moving in the right direction. So that I think international pressure or persuasion is important, and I hope Brazil will play a role in it.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your opinion with us. Luana, I want to transmit the, okay. Luana?
Thank you so much to both professors. We will take a couple of questions from the audience. And the first one asks, what are the impacts of AUKUS to the Japanese strategy of empowering neighboring countries and to the FOIP? We'll send also the question in our chat.
Okay,
So you can
AUKUS is super important, and I was really happy when I heard the news that Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States decided to cooperate to enhance its presence and capability in the Pacific. And as a part of the agreement among those three countries, Australia decided to procure 8 nuclear-powered attack submarines. So actually, Australia decided to introduce submarines from France. And when Australia was trying to decide from which country to buy submarines, they are thinking about German submarines, Japanese submarines, and French submarines. And actually, both Germans and the Japanese were thinking, well, Australia will procure submarines from either of us, from Germany or from Japan. Surprise, surprise, they chose French ones. Well, I certainly admire French defense technologies, but unfortunately, among those three choices, French submarines was the least capable one. So when I heard the news that Australia chose a French submarine, I said, oh, why is Australia trying to undermine its position, and why is Australia trying to sideline itself? So that was unfortunate. I thought Australia will not be able to play an important strategic role in this region militarily. But then I was again surprised by August's announcement. Now, from Australians changed their mind and decided not to buy this not too capable French submarines, and decided to procure high-end, most capable submarines, nuclear-powered submarines, which has a tremendous strategic implications. So that will actually alter the balance of power, underwater competition in the region So I'm very happy about it. And I would say that the AUKUS agreement was one of the most strategically important developments in the Pacific in recent years. So hopefully that will contribute to the maintenance of peace and stability in this region.
Thank you, Professor Mishishita. And our last question asks, considering economic dependencies, could Japan's diplomacy transition to a strategy of cooperation with China? And what would that mean for projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative and FOIP?
Actually, in 2018, then Prime Minister Abe visited China, Beijing, and met with President Xi and Prime Minister Li, and talked about how to kind of work together to promote FOIP, free and open Indo-Pacific, which Japan promotes, and BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, that China promotes, and how to merge them together and work together on those things. And so what they came up with was the idea to promote third country cooperation. What it means is that both Japan and China are interested in developing or undertaking developmental initiatives in the Indo-Pacific region, right? So why don't they agreed that to encourage Japanese enterprises, business firms, and the Chinese counterpart to work together on some of the projects. Unfortunately, so there were like we thought there were several very big promising project areas or projects. Unfortunately, so far, none of them has succeeded in or produced a meaningful results. So there are two challenges. One is that certainly, as we talked about today, there is a strategic competition going on between China and other countries in this region, including Japan. But also, it's actually proved to be quite difficult for the two countries. Well, we trade with each other, but we cannot, it's hard for us to work together on the same project. So that is a challenge. And well, certainly, as this person pointed out, it's a good news that we are interdependent. So that would kind of moderate our actions to each other. So that's a good news. But another bad news is China is trying to use this interdependency as a tool for pressure, right? As Professor Uehara mentioned, China is using economic tools to pressure countries by, like, vis-a-vis Australia. China decided not to buy wine from Australia in order to pressure Australians. And China decided not to buy pineapples from Taiwan to put pressure on Taiwan. So that's a kind of coercive use of economic or interdependency. That's really unfortunate. So again, the countries in this region and in the world hopefully get together and tell the Chinese, you cannot do this and get away with it. And if you do it, we will try to help the target countries or victimized countries. So we are saying, when China stopped buying wine from Australia, why don't we buy wine from Australia? Japanese people and other countries, people in other countries in this region buy wine from Australia and buy pineapples from Taiwan. And actually I did. after that event, there are a lot of Japanese supermarkets started to sell Taiwanese pineapples. I bought one and ate it. That was delicious. That's what we should be doing to counter that kind of Chinese pressure tactics.
Okay, as our time is up, unfortunately, we would like to thank once again the professors for agreeing to create this space of learning and exchange, as well as the Japan House São Paulo for supporting the event and the audience for joining in. This lecture will be followed by a second webinar on November 25th, in which Professor Uehara will conduct the main lecture on Japanese foreign policy in the 21st century. And we wish everyone a lovely night and see you in our next event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.